In the Vajrayana practice, especially in what is called the generation and completion stage, one of the fundamental parts of the practice are called the three transformations. The three transformations, namely, is to transform death into the Dharmakaya, Bardo into the Sambhogakaya, and rebirth into the Nirmanakaya. Trying to make it simple, it means that in the moment of death is when the gross body loses strength and the subtle body manifests more strongly. Then the subtle body loses strength and the very subtle body manifests strongly. The same thing goes together with the gross, subtle, and very subtle mind. The last moment of the process of death is called the clear light. Clear light is when the gross body has completely dissolved, the subtle body has completely dissolved, and there is only the very subtle body with a very subtle mind, which is called clear light, that manifests at that moment. This happens to all sentient beings when we die. But what is possible to do through meditation, through a preparation before, is that in the moment of death, to recognize the process of death, and then actually to meditate during the process of death into one's own true nature, which is the lack of inherent existence, the emptiness, shunyata, of one's own self and one's own mind. Once the practitioner realizes emptiness at the moment of the process of death, this will bring naturally his subtle mind and the very subtle mind in the same direction. So if he's able to go through that, he can then, in the moment of the actual death, which is called the clear light, recognize one's own nature as being empty of inherent existence. And by that, he can generate himself as the Dharmakaya, generate the identity, I am the pure body of a Buddha. Because the pure mind, the pure very subtle body and the pure very subtle mind of a Buddha is actually the state in which one recognizes on a very subtle, non-conceptual level one's own true nature. So basically, in the process of death, instead of just having, like, say, let's say, an ordinary death, it's possible to transform that, use the process of death to realize one's own true nature. That's what we call to transform death, which is the actual clear light of death, into the Dharmakaya. The next part after death is the Bardo. The Bardo is a subtle body, okay, which is also called Yilu in Tibetan, which is a mind body. It's a body that doesn't have any gross matter, to say. At that moment, once the transformation of the death is then transformed into the Dharmakaya, it's possible after that to generate oneself into the Bardo state, but again with a pure identity of the Buddha, manifesting from a very subtle level into a more gross level, which is called subtle. At that level is called the Sambhogakaya, the enjoyment body, which is manifesting on a subtle body of a Buddha. Because in the Bardo is already a subtle manifestation of the body. So once the practitioner then manifests himself in a pure way, with a pure identity within the Bardo. That's called to transform the Bardo into the Sambhogakaya. And then, because the practitioner cannot stay on that stage to help other sentient beings, because to help others we must manifest in a level that the others can perceive, then the practitioner would then take physical rebirth into a gross body. And that's called the transformation of rebirth into the Nirmanakaya, which is the moment in which he takes rebirth out of choice and not out of karma. Okay? So to do this is the actual three transformations. In order to be able to do that, the practice starts much before, by doing the three transformations in meditation. So in our own meditative state, we go through the process of death, we simulate our own process of death, and in that simulation we transform it into the Dharmakaya. Then we simulate the process of Bardo into the Sambhogakaya, and we simulate the process of rebirth into the Nirmanakaya. In other words, we simulate the process of our own death and transform it, which means that we identify ourselves within our own true nature. And the very subtle mind that recognizes one's own true nature is the actual state of mind of enlightened Buddha. So that's why we say we transform, or we bring the Dharmakaya into the path. We transform the death into the Dharmakaya, which is the very subtle mind of a Buddha. Then we manifest ourselves in a more gross way, but still subtle, which is as the Sambhogakaya, the the enjoyment body, and there we manifest in a gross level as the so-called the emanation body. In order to do this practice, normally it's divided into 3 stages. First stage is into meditation. So basically it's more conceptual. We imagine the process of death, and then we imagine this transformation happening. And we do that again and again, repeating it. Second step, once the practitioner has been fully acquainted with the process in meditation, then he should start transforming the sleep, which means the process of falling asleep is very similar to the process of death. So he should transform the stage of falling asleep into what is called the Dharmakaya of, the clear light of sleep. So he will take the clear light of sleep, which is the last moment before we enter into deep sleep, and transform that into the Dharmakaya. Then he should transform the dream into the Sambhogakaya, and the awakening in the morning into the Nirmanakaya. Once the practitioner is really able to do that in the process of sleep, dream, and awakening, then he will be much more prepared to do it in his actual death, actual bardo, and actual rebirth. Also, one other point related to that is that one of the fundamental aspects of the Vajrayana practice is to develop a pure identity, is to identify oneself as being a Buddha, identify one's own self within a pure state. And to do that, we must first eliminate our gross identity. That's why the process of death and rebirth is very important. Because the only way for me really to see myself as Tara, I am Yamantaka, I am Manjushri, or any other practice that we do, the only way for me to do that is by first eliminating my gross identity. This, let's say, mundane identity that I have, ordinary identity that I have. And in order to eliminate this ordinary identity, ordinary appearance, I must first die. So we simulate the process of death, and from within the pure state of clear light that we transform into pure form, from that then we manifest ourselves into the Buddha. Which means first we need to take the gross body out, the gross mind, the subtle body, and from the very subtle body and mind within a pure state, that's from that we manifest ourselves as the Buddha. So actually to do the 3 transformations is fundamentally important for the Vajrayana practice.